Hello everyone, my name is Cornelius Nomeshi. I'm a medical doctor from Ghana. I completed my MPA degree at the Harvard Th School of Public Health this past summer. Last year, during my application process, I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Danya Qato, who is a friend and a senior colleague. Dr. Banda's knowledge and experience of the graduate application process made it easier to write an outstanding personal statement, also aim for the right test course and finding the right people to write recommendation letters for me. He also gave me a really good insight about the funding landscape available for me for my education. I was able to get admission into most of the top schools that I applied for, including Johns Hopkins, Columbia University, Boston University, and then Harvard University. Yeah, so if you are actually looking to advance your studies and you're looking for a good and friendly coach, I would recommend no other person than Dr. Banda.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Danya Qato, a PhD student at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and an MPH MBA Summer Scholar alum. I've navigated the graduate school application process, gaining admission into institutions like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins. And now I'm here to help you on your journey. Remember, the journey to graduate school may seem tough, but with the right tools and mindset, you'll be on your way to success. Don't forget to check out my other videos for more tips and insights. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing forward. Dr. Banda signing off.
Hello everyone, I am Emmanuel Animashan. I'm a Nigerian physician. I met Dr. Banda sometime last year. I remember I had a very difficult time trying to prepare my application packages to schools of public health in the United States, and I went online in search of information, and then I came across his LinkedIn profile. I remember I connected with him, and then I spent a long day going through his profile, and I found really very interesting things where he had shared insights into a lot of the application, a lot of components of the application process. I also eventually got to follow his YouTube account. I saw a lot of videos, and I saw that he had a lot of stuff that were quite inspiring. For one, I liked the fact that he had gone through the process. He had really nice admission offers when he was going to move to the United States, and that gave me some sort of assurance that he had gone through it, and I could as well go through the same process that he had gone through using the advice that he had given. It was really helpful. He also organized a couple of live sessions. I remember where he brought in faculty, people who were in charge of admissions in some of these schools, and that was really very helpful for me. And I followed this process. Basically I followed through with everything that he recommended, and I got really good results. At the end of the application cycle, I got admitted into Johns Hopkins University, Harvard, Yale, Emory, and I mean, those were I really didn't apply to much schools because I sort of believed in the processes that he had outlined, and I got admitted into the schools that I applied to, and I got really good scholarship offers too. I eventually chose to come to Hopkins, where I'm currently enrolled in the PhD dual degree program, and I must say it was also very helpful in selecting which school I would eventually come to, because I had a really tough time trying to decide. When you have really good offers, you have a hard time deciding, and it was very helpful. I recommend that everyone who is applying to schools of public health or to graduate school generally in the United States should definitely follow Dr. Banda on his LinkedIn, his YouTube, follow him everywhere, and you can be rest assured that he's always ready to answer your questions and attend to your concerns. You don't even have to necessarily always speak with him. Just by following his pages and following up with the activities, you definitely are on a good path. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ama Isuman, and I'm a physician from Ghana. 2 years ago, I decided to apply for the dual degree MPH and MBA at Hopkins. So I went onto the Hopkins website and looked for current and past students who had gone through the program. And I was happy to see a Ghanaian face there. I saw Dr. Banda on the Hopkins website. So I looked him up on LinkedIn, reached out to Dr. Banda on LinkedIn, because I had specific questions about the dual degree MBA MPH program here and about the summer scholarship as well, because I was interested in, he was doing the program under the summer scholarship. He answered my questions, helped me assess my fit for the program, and down the line also talked me through how to communicate with, like, school officials with some of the different questions I had, and who to talk to as well. So fast forward, today I'm here at Hopkins. I'm a dual degree student pursuing my MBA and MPH. I'm a summer scholar, and I go into all the schools I applied to. So if you're thinking of applying for graduate school here, whether it's an MPH or a PhD program, I recommend watching his videos on YouTube and LinkedIn because they have very helpful information in there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, wherever you're watching us from. Welcome to the Scholars Table. I'm your host, Dr. Banda Khalifa. Today, we are very excited to host Dr. Danya Qato on the Scholars Table. She's an associate professor with the University of Maryland, and a professor of practice, science and health outcomes research. He has been leading the pharmaceutical services health research program for almost 5 years. So she pretty much knows a lot about the admission process. And I must say that the program is one of the most competitive that I've interviewed for. I've interviewed for the program twice, and it's really a good program. So today we are going to have the opportunity to talk to her and delve into all the intricacies of the program. She's a pharmacist by training and also an epidemiologist. She received her education from Brown University to Harvard University, so you can understand why she's a special guest on our program today. So if you are new here, welcome to the Scholars Table. We are streaming live on LinkedIn and on YouTube. If you're having any technical challenges on LinkedIn, you can hop onto the YouTube page. If you're new, kindly subscribe, follow our LinkedIn page for more insights on graduate school application. Without wasting much time, I would like to introduce our guests onto the Scholars Table because we have so much to talk about. So let me invite our guests. Professor Qato, good afternoon and welcome to the Scholars Table. We are very excited to welcome you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalifa, and thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I'm very much excited. I'm very much excited. So before we even go into the actual discussions, for those, I mean, in our audience who may not be familiar with the kind of work you do or what you've been up to for the past couple of years, could you briefly describe your journey in the field of public health or epidemiology, and also being a program director at the University of Maryland?
Sure. So I was clinically trained as a pharmacist in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. I'm originally from Palestine. Um, and it was actually in my last year of pharmacy school that I developed an interest in public health because, in clinical training in the US, whether it's pharmacy or medicine or even nursing, there's this almost myopic focus on just that individual clinical encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I worked through my rotations during pharmacy school, I realized, well, there's something happening beyond that patient encounter that's impacting that person's health and that person's health trajectory. It's
Mm-hmm.
also impacting their ability to access healthcare. And so I became really interested in public health. I worked for a year at the University of Chicago Hospital. I had actually applied my final year of pharmacy school to MPH programs, specifically Harvard and Hopkins, and I got admitted, but I had no funding. So I
Funding, yeah.
know that's a predicament that a lot of people are in. Well, I was
Yeah.
in that predicament, and I decided to ask if I can have a year to try to find funding. And in that year, I worked as a pharmacist at the University of Chicago, and I applied to a bunch of fellowships and scholarships. And I was awarded the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans to be able to support my MPH. And I decided to enroll at the Harvard School of Public Health, which is what it was called at the time. And so the Harvard program was a one-year program. It was my particular concentration was around international health and global health, which
Okay.
was sort of the general area I felt like I was most passionate about and wanted to sort of equip myself with those tools. But it was during my MPH that I realized I was the token pharmacist in the room, but I had very little pharmacy experience. So it
Mm-hmm.
was almost like you're playing a role, but you have very little experience to leverage to reflect an expertise in that role. So I actually decided to take some time to work as a pharmacist. I was a community pharmacist for several years. I also wanted to pay back loans and, had some personal stuff going on. And so I worked as a pharmacist in Chicago for many years. And then I decided that I wanted to move on my education. We had moved to Providence, and Brown has a great program in health services research.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky to be admitted into that program with full funding as well. And so Brown really helped me kind of develop my training in not just health services research, but how it intersects with pharmaceutical health services research and sort of the role of epidemiologic methods in
Mm-hmm.
being able to make sense of pharmaceutical policies. So that's my sort of academic journey in a nutshell. In terms of my role as graduate program director,
Mm-hmm.
I stepped into this role 5 years ago, and I was so enthusiastic about stepping into this role. Once the previous program director had decided to step down, I was really, really grateful that my chair was supportive and really wanted me to take this on, because I felt like this natural energy to want to support students and be an advocate for students. And this was sort of the natural administrative and leadership role that would allow me to do that. And so it was really a great honor to have been given this opportunity. And I did it for 5 years, and I decided, my mentors told me, Danya, it's time to pass the baton and move on to other things. And
Uh-huh.
when you're in a leadership position, you also just naturally come to a point where you feel like you've done your duties.
Yeah.
And I felt very strongly that I had accomplished a lot, and I hadn't done it singularly. I hadn't done it on my own. But in my role as graduate program director, I felt like, I had a few feathers in my cap, and I felt like it was time to pass the baton. So that's just kind of a helicopter
Yeah.
overview of my experience, but happy to delve into other particularities in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think that this is very, very enriching experience. Like, right after your pharmacy, going into public health, and then going into the workforce for a while, and then eventually coming back into academia. Um, but I mean, being a program director for 5 years, what can you tell us about some of the challenges and the rewarding moments? I know how difficult it might have been for admissions committee to decide the fates of hundreds of students. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered in your role?
Yeah. I'm happy I'll start with the challenges so we can end on a good note with the rewards.
Yeah.
So, in any leadership position, especially in academia now, there is a current climate of cost control and sort of budget cuts, and that
Mm-hmm.
trickles down to the support that comes for leadership. So, one of the, I think, the main challenges for me has been the what I would say is not full administrative support for the role while I was in it. I think it is also difficult to sort of identify priority areas for intervention. Your time as when you think about the time that's apportioned to you every day to work on these issues, you have to make decisions about what areas that you want to prioritize for
Mm-hmm.
intervention.
Yeah.
And so for me, I identified very early on that one of the areas that I was really keen to serve as an advocate and proponent for was increased stipends for students. So we guarantee full funding for students so long as they maintain good academic standing in the program. And many students had mentioned that living in Baltimore has become more and more costly, especially as a lot of DC residents had been moving into Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I identified really early on that student stipends were a priority area that I wanted to focus on because it was essential for students to have a better quality of life throughout the duration of their training in the program. So I think, I'm bringing that up to say that these are decisions that I made. They were very deliberate decisions. And
Yeah.
I worked with students hand in hand, wonderful students who were able to collate information about average stipends nationally and try to make a very strong case that our stipends were no longer meeting the needs of students. And so I was really grateful that our efforts bore fruit and the university at large signed on to this idea and increased student stipends across the board in a very significant way. There's always room, right? There's always room to have higher and higher stipends. And so that's never an issue that goes away. So I continue to be an advocate for
Mm-hmm.
higher stipends for students,
Yeah.
but we made significant progress there. Um, I think the other difficult thing being in this kind of role is navigating interpersonal conflict, whether it be between students or between students and faculty. Those are very difficult because they're very sensitive, and they're sensitive in an emotional sense, but they're also sensitive to me because I have to be so mindful of the power dynamics, right,
Yeah.
between faculty and students. And then I also want to be fair and equitable in the way that we, adjudicate a resolution in those cases. So um, I would say that that is a challenge in this type of leadership role,
Yeah.
because you really have to go out there and do your best to make sure you understand both sides, but also come to a place that's fair and equitable. Um, I think rewards are so many, Banda. There's so many. Um, I can sort of list for you some of the main ones. I mean, the main one that I've taken away is the meaningful and deep relationships I've been able to build with our students.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, this is probably something maybe folks don't expect, but also with applicants, even applicants that don't ultimately get admitted into our program. We're friends on LinkedIn, and I've just been really grateful to be that first point of engagement with applicants, helping them navigate the application process,
Yeah.
with students once they start into the program. And we have many international students. So I'm very sensitive to some of the needs of international students, especially, they're leaving their social capital and they're
Yeah.
coming to this new world, an entire new world. And so I've been really grateful to be that first point of engagement with students. It's really been a great honor for me. And it's really allowed me to build deep and meaningful relationships with students. I think the other great reward is I feel so honored that I've been able to be an advocate for students. Like
Yeah.
when you acknowledge the power dynamic between faculty and students, that's sort of baked into academia. And then there's obviously also power dynamics within faculty, et cetera, et cetera. Being that person that tries to break down those dynamics and say, we're going to make sure that students have a voice in the department. We're going to make sure that students have a voice, for example, in the admissions process.
Mm-hmm.
So I advocated for a student to become a member of the admissions committee. And every student who served has told me how meaningful that experience has been, because then they also become advocates for students.
Yes. Yes.
It's been so great to see that, and really seeing students succeed, seeing applicants who made it or didn't make it into our program who are succeeding in other programs, or they're trying one more time, but being able to give them that support um, has really been the most rewarding part of this work.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to acknowledge some of the critical issues that you've been able to address, particularly with the issue of stipend. I mean,
Mm.
for PhD students and for international students who are limited in the options of exploring um, sources of funding, giving them a livable stipend is very crucial. And hopefully, I have some Hopkins people listening. They should average out the national stipend rate and then we consider their offers. Anyway, so I mean, I've had the privilege of applying to the program twice. I mean, when I was thinking of PhD, I spoke with a couple of faculty. Initially, like I was really interested in pharmacoepidemiology, right? So I spoke with a couple of faculty at the Center for Drug Safety, and one of the top schools that they mentioned was, have you checked the University of Maryland program? Because it's very, very known for pharmacoepidemiology. So I did some digging. I think at that time I was in second year of my dual degree and then applied. I got interviewed, and the whole process was too complicated for me. I was like, "What program is this?" Right? So, I mean, in your like from your perspective as a program director and looking at the kind of students that come in and go out, what makes the pharmaceutical services health research program like stand out? Because I could see the competition whilst I was interviewing for the program.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to say, in defense of our admissions process, I would say the idea is, in as much as it's about making sure that we are fair and equitable in how we make decisions around admissions, it's also about making sure that we're the right program for a student and for an applicant. And so sometimes that takes a couple of conversations, right? Um, Maybe it's a little too elaborate. That's a fair point. Um, but just a general idea of I think why we have those sort of milestones in our admissions process is to really make sure not only that the student's right for our program, but that we're right for a student.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to tell you how many brilliant applicants
Yeah.
come through our program, and then it comes to a point where we both realize we're actually not the right program for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a number of reasons. It could be geographic. It could be it could be just the content expertise of faculty in the department. But just to kind of give you an idea of sort of the logic behind the admissions process, but we can get to that later.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we stand out in a lot of ways. First and foremost, I
There's typing.
really
There's typing. Mention there's typing first.
okay, sure. I'll mention that we guarantee funding for all our students, international, national students, automatic support initially through this is the typical funding mechanism. The first year typically funded through a teaching assistantship in the pharmacy school, and then thereafter students serve as research assistants to faculty who by and large become that student's primary mentor, and
Okay.
then dissertation advisor or dissertation chair. So that includes the stipend, tuition remission, health insurance, and fees. And one thing that's not included really in that number, but I think we really pride ourselves on, is supporting students to participate in national, international society meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So we guarantee for students who are first authors on a presentation that we support them up to a certain amount to be able to ensure that they're able to participate. So we're really keen on not preventing students from participating in these really important professional meetings, especially in terms of networking, in terms of sort of the practice and professionalization that comes with conference participation. I think we stand out also in terms of the intimacy with which students engage with faculty. We're not that big of a department.
Mm-hmm.
So students see faculty more often just in that real encounter. With maybe one or two exceptions, all of our classes are in person, very hands-on. Students are embedded early in the process in research that faculty are doing, initially through research rotations, and then finally through their RA assignment. So I think one thing that differentiates us, and this is something I found it interesting, that I receive a lot of emails from students that say, I'm really interested. They're lovely emails, and I'm really interested in your research. Can you be my advisor? And it's almost like I have an automatic response to that, which is actually we pride ourselves on allowing students the opportunity to embed themselves in different faculty research so
Yeah.
that they can get a better sense if actually that is the faculty member they want to work with. And you can imagine, you're in academia right now, you can imagine someone you might have thought would be your first pick as your dissertation chair. When you arrived, you might not have felt the same about
Yeah.
the relationship you have with that person, or their mentoring style, or maybe their research has taken a direction that is sort of entirely a direction you don't want to go. So we see that as a great asset, that we provide students this 1-year buffer where they can embed themselves in different research spaces, so they can get a sense not only of the research, but also the mentoring style of faculty in the department. And also, in turn, faculty can get to know the students more. And so that when we make that match in their the summer after their first year, it's a match that's more data-driven.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because now the students kind of have an experience to draw on and say, well, I really thought I wanted to work with Professor X, but actually Professor Y, their mentoring style is more in line with, what I would look for in a mentor. And they're also doing research I'm interested in. And that professor is also interested in working with me. So I think that's a unique aspect of our program, actually. And throughout this, we commit to funding and supporting students.
Okay.
I could go on, but
Yeah.
I'll add one more thing that I think differentiates us, and it's our proximity and our relationships with government agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration. So we have one of the few CERCs in the country, that's the Center for Excellence in Research, that is funded by the FDA. So a lot of students try to not try to, they are embedded in research that's funded by the FDA, and they get to intersect with folks in the FDA. And then the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, we're right near Washington, D.C. So we're in sort of an ecosystem of policymaking and regulation that I think serves our students very well.
Awesome, awesome. So for people who don't really, you know, I know that most students, most international students, all they've heard about is MPH, Master of Public Health, right? And epidemiology, Master of Public Health. So if you are to, for example, summarize what the program offers in terms of tracks, or in terms of, for example, is it only at the doctoral level, or you have students at the master's level, and what specialized tracks are there, and what kind of demographics do you usually get in a typical cohort? I know this is like a very compressed questions, but first of all, I want students to be able to understand what the program is. So is it at the master's level, or it's both at the master's level and the PhD level, and what specialized tracks are there, and also what kind of students apply to that program?
Sure. So I'll start off with the degree programs we have. So we have an MS program and a PhD program. Our focus in the graduate program is on PhD training.
Okay.
So, for example, this year we're not accepting MS applicants this year.
Okay.
Our focus is on PhD applicants. Next year, we might open up the MS applications. So that being said, we have 4 distinct pathways that students sort of elect into and decide upon. But before I go into them, I want to say all of the students get exposure to these pathways, right?
Okay.
In one way or another, through the required coursework. And all of them at the end of the day, when they come to that really landmark moment, when they get hooded, right, for their PhD, they're going to have a degree that says pharmaceutical health services research.
Okay.
Whether they choose the pharmacoeconomics track, the pharmacoepidemiology track, the pharmaceutical policy track, or the comparative effectiveness and patient-centered outcomes research track. So I think that's a good framework for students to also understand that it's not that they're locked into a track that means that that's the degree they're going to get. And I think that's actually sometimes a concern with students. There's exposure to all of these tracks through the required coursework, but these tracks they enable a lot of things. One of them is for a student to develop an expertise in a particular area within health services research. For example, a student might say, I'm really interested specifically in the costs and benefits of pharmaceutical products. You know, that's something that would drive someone to elect into the pharmacoeconomics track, right? Think about the econometrics and economic methodologies and models that would be required to make sense of some of those questions. And then we have pharmacoepidemiology, as you had mentioned earlier, pharmaceutical policy, and comparative effectiveness in patient-centered research, which I think also a standout concentration in our department. We're one of the few schools that have a really rich concentration in patient-centered outcomes research. In fact, you know, one of our graduates recently opened a consulting firm that is focused on research related to patient-centered outcomes research and generating patient-reported outcomes information. So it's also a really kind of unique aspect of our training program.
Okay,
in terms
great.
Of
in terms of like the demographics, what kind of students apply to the program? In terms of background, yes.
Sure. I'll answer that at different scales. So at the geographic level, we have a diversity of applicants nationally and internationally. We have a really high number of international applicants, very stellar applicants that apply from non-US based areas and non-US based training as well. In terms of disciplinary background, also very diverse. I think maybe there's also an expectation that everyone that enters our program has a pharmacy background. That's sometimes true. We have some trainees, current trainees that have a PharmD or have a B Pharm or have previous training in pharmacy. We have several MDs in our program. We have folks whose background is specifically in economics, but don't
Okay.
have a specific clinical degree. So I would say there's a diversity of backgrounds that apply to our program. I would say by and large, I think it's a fair assessment to say that many of our applicants do have some kind of post undergraduate training.
Okay.
It's not always the case. We've accepted some folks straight out of undergrad, or, in international contexts, sometimes, people get into their clinical degree immediately after high school. So their PharmD is technically, their post high school degree,
Yeah.
whereas here somebody would be in there longer. So we take that into consideration. Like, there's different settings where the academic infrastructure is going to be different and the training is going to be different. But I would say what really ties successful applicants together, which I'm sure we'll get to, is an interest in health services research, is an interest in building skills and training in answering questions of relevance to population health through pharmacoeconomic methods, through pharmacoepi methods, through pharmaceutical policy methods, and through comparative effectiveness and patient-centered outcomes research methods. So I think that's what ties our applicants together. But otherwise, we have a great diversity of applicants that make their way through our process.
Okay. I think that's a fair assessment. So it's good to say that it's not only for those with health related background. You don't have to be a pharmacist or an MD to apply for the program, and
That's,
you don't necessarily have to have a master's before you can apply. But most students do.
that's correct.
Yeah.
You don't. It's not a requirement, but I would say most of in my experience as graduate program director, most of the applicants who ultimately make it into the program do have a master's. We've had applicants also who apply to the program, are not admitted, get a master's, reapply, and are admitted. And it's not just that they had a master's, right? Someone can look at that and say, oh, they got a master's, you just check the master. No, it's they've developed a richer understanding and intimacy and appreciation for the field of health services research through their completion of a master's degree.
Okay, that's fair. So before we go into our next segment, maybe you'll see if we have questions. So if for those of us who just joined us, this is the Scholars Table. I'm here with Dr. Qato, who is the former program director for University of Maryland Pharmaceutical Services Health Research. We currently we had over 100 people watching us on LinkedIn, and we are almost 20 people from YouTube and Facebook. So most of the comments are just acknowledgements and appreciation for the event. So I think we would move straight into the aspect that a lot of people want to start writing down some notes, right? So let's dive into the application requirements and the process of admission. Given how competitive the program is, what are the top qualities that you look for in prospective students?
So I want to, I think, start off by saying how terrifying that kind of question is, because it sort of, I think, may create the illusion or thought that there's a cookie cutter perfect application. And there's really nothing further from the truth. There are things that an applicant can do to prepare their application, their application to be the most competitive that it can be.
Yeah.
But to say that there's a perfect application is really a slippery slope,
Mm-hmm.
because it also, I think, encourages people to just kind of fit into the box and sort of just do a checkmark approach to their statement of purpose, for example, their essay, etc. So I want to just start off with that caveat, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important for applicants to understand that you are the captain of your application, and what you want to do as an applicant is put the best application forward that reflects the best in you. And for our applications, I would say several things. One is I'll do the things we don't require. This year, and for a few years, it's been a couple of years, we are not requiring, nor will we review the GRE. So I
Okay.
just want to put that out there. If you take it just for our program, it's not going to be reviewed. And I can get into that later. There's a lot of conversation that happens around equity in terms of the GRE exam and just standardized exams in general. There was also the difficulty of students sitting for the exam during COVID that drove that decision, but that's important for applicants to know. We require a personal statement. It's not very generous in terms of the space that's afforded to you in that personal statement. It's about 500 words. So do you want me to go through each of them and give advice for each of them, or just go through them and then we can talk?
Yes, just the highlights of yeah.
Sure. Okay. So a personal statement, a CV, and 2 letters of recommendation. And if you're an international applicant, the TOEFL, unless you get exempted from the TOEFL. And there's several ways you could get exempted, but we don't need to go into that. And your transcripts from your previous academic institutions. And then obviously there's an application portal, an application that you have to fill out that's through the University of Maryland, Baltimore Graduate School.
Okay. All right. So the next question then is there any prerequisites or specific courses that applicants might have completed before applying for the program? Do you have any specific prerequisites?
Yeah, I would say, again, this is one of those slippery slope questions, but by and large, there is an expectation that the student has had some kind of exposure to advanced quantitative methods. And
Okay.
this could be a biostat course in undergrad. It could be a biostat course in a graduate program, whether it's an MPH or an MS degree. I think there's an expectation, although again, it's not a solid requirement, that there's some kind of exposure to advanced quantitative methods and that the student has done well in those courses. I think there's also an expectation, which is a little harder to assess, which is written communication, the ability to write in a way that's clear, that's not convoluted by jargon. It's really a skill set that I think we look for in applicants. That being said, we're also a training program, right? If we had applicants that come in with like 20 publications in the top journals, and we only admit those applicants, I think there's some ethical issue there, right?
Yeah.
Like you're only admitting people who already have this vast expertise. No, we're also a training program. So it's kind of a delicate balance. Like what does the applicant have to have before they enter? And then what are the skills that we expect them to develop as part of the program?
Yeah.
But as a generalization, I would say that quantitative training or evidence of quantitative training and communication skills are really key areas.
Okay, I think you've made like a very insightful comment about the fact that the PhD is a training program, and one of the ideas is to be able to train people to to become competent in certain areas. So to expect that everybody comes in with, an already established credential isn't a fair assessment. I think that is very, very eye opening. And I know for programs, for certain programs, not having a publication seems like a death sentence, right? How does University of Maryland assess? I know, like, a bit of deviating, but do you have expectations for applicants having publications, especially if you're taking students directly from undergrad? I mean, elsewhere in the international community, it's very difficult to get a publication at the undergrad level. So, how are you able to assess students without publication?
It's a very difficult question to answer because I would say um, there's an understanding that some students and some applicants will have had more opportunities than others
Hmm.
to be able to be a co-author or primary author on a publication. So that's one thing we bring to the process is an understanding of this dynamic, right? I think there's other ways beyond publications that students can reflect engagement in the field. And that can include presentations at local, regional, national meetings where they are.
Okay.
I think it can include participating in white papers or other types of published work that reflect students' deep engagement in the field, or at least interest and exposure to the field.
Hmm.
Um, is it is it a positive aspect of an application to have one or two publications? Absolutely. It's never looked down on. But then you open up the question of, well, what was the role of the student in that publication? What was the quality of that publication? Where was it published, et cetera, which opens up in another area of discussion. So these are not black and white issues, right? There's no
Yeah.
chance that they have one publication, but if a student has a first author publication and they've done primary analysis of a data set and summarized the data and wrote it in a paper or a presentation, that bodes very well for them in showcasing their appreciation for the field of health services research, right?
Hmm.
And that's something that I think is really important in the admissions process, is for a student to reflect that understanding, not necessarily deeply, right? But to understand what is the field of health services research. Why would an applicant, apply to programs in pharmaceutical health services research and not, public health programs,
Yeah.
um, or a PhD in epidemiology? So these are some questions that sort of uh, we can get to it a little bit later, but they're
Yeah.
part of what you're asking, which is what is the thing that a student has to do to look favorably to a admissions committee? And I think it's so multifaceted that it's really hard to say that there's one sure aspect of the application that's going to be either entryway into admission, or like you said, if it doesn't happen, that it's a death sentence. And I don't want to get into the death sentence conversation because I think there might be some death sentences. I think some of
Yeah.
that some of that happens actually in the interview process, and
Okay.
it's more about for example, an applicant who is not very professional or kind to the faculty or the staff or the students that they're interacting with, right? You can have the most stellar application, but if you don't reflect kindness, even in the very preliminary admissions process, that could be a death sentence, right? But not
Hmm.
having a publication, I wouldn't go out and say that unequivocally. Not having a
Yeah.
publication is a death sentence. I think there are other ways to reflect your engagement in the field other than a publication.
Okay. Okay. I think we can talk more about the interview process and what are the um, uh, the red flags in your interview. But before we talk about that, how do you typically weigh academic qualifications versus practical experience in the field? Because you made mention that sometimes you have students straight from undergrad. So how do you assess people with no professional experience versus those with professional experience?
So I do want to just carefully say that it's very rare that we'll accept an applicant straight out of undergrad. I was
Okay.
saying that those have been exceptions that
Mm-hmm.
we've done that. Most of our admitted applicants have some kind of graduate level training,
Okay.
whether it's an MS or an MPH. Here's the thing: it's an art form, right? There's a lot of subjectivity that's part of this process of weighing academic performance and real world experience, as they
Yeah.
say. And I'll say a few things about that, because one of the discussions we've had also as an admissions committee is like, how do we actually compare institutions?
Mm-hmm.
So you might see someone who has straight A's at an institution that might be known for some kind of grade inflation applying, and then someone who's at an international institution that is the top institution in that country, they received straight B's. I'm just
Yeah.
using this as an example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, you might on the surface say, oh, the straight A student looks by far better
Mm-hmm.
academically than the other student. But we've actually had really rich conversations about the fact that an A in one institution is not equivalent necessarily to an A in another institution.
Yeah.
Or a B in one institution is not equivalent to a B in another institution. Because in some institutions, especially international institutions, it's really difficult to get that A. It's also maybe only a certain number of students in a class will get an A. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of colleagues that work
Mm-hmm.
in universities across the world. We have these conversations like, I've worked in an institution internationally, I won't name it, where they told me I can only give 3 students an A.
Hey, yeah.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
because there were scholarships that were linked to a student receiving, straight A's in a particular semester, and that university was going through budget issues, and so they came to me and said, we won't get into that, Banda, because that's the whole
Yeah.
thing. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Yeah.
I want to say that that's why these ways of thinking about academic background, there's no generalization that can be made. Every application has to be reviewed within the ecosystem of the applicant that applied.
Yeah.
And that's why we take so long reviewing applications, because we actually do think about some of these issues. So that's one thing. The balance question is a really important question. I think you can think of it several ways. One is, if the academic training is not so compelling, but the real world training is very compelling. So you might have someone who did well in their graduate training or in their undergrad, but they really shined when they worked at a consulting company,
Yeah.
doing work around something related to patient insurance benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making all of these are just examples, but that would actually have some weight, right, in assessing the applicant, because it not only reflects that the student was able to be in a career that is focused broadly on health services research, but that they've been able to succeed in that career, and that they've been exposed to these really important questions in health services research. So I would say it's a balance, and it's an
Yeah.
art, and there's a lot of subjectivity that enters into that, unfortunately. I think, you want to get into specificities. There's some you know, cons to submitting an application where a transcript has many C's, for example.
Yeah.
And if those C's are especially in quantitative classes, or if you did a master's and your epidemiology biostat grades are C, unless you make a really compelling case why that happened, we would look at that and say, we don't think you would be prepared for the rigor of our program, and we
Yeah.
want you to succeed, and we don't want to admit you to the program only to have you fail out. So I think those kind of considerations are definitely made.
Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment, particularly with the issue of comparing international grades with domestic grades, because I've experienced both, and I can tell you that getting a C, the amount of effort I have to put in to get something like a C in medical school is equivalent to getting an A here, because
I
um
hear.
I mean, a professor can tell you I don't give A's in my class, right? So from the start, no matter what you do, you know you're not going to get an A, or he's not
Yeah,
going to give you an A. So the dynamics are different. Um, so I want you to take us through the interview process. I know the time that I was doing my interview, it was COVID time, so most of it was virtual. But it was, I still felt the intensity with the interview. Um, Prior to the COVID pandemic, how were you conducting your interviews? Because I reached out to one particular student. He was saying, "Oh, another phase is that you come in and then you have some discussion with students, or you go out with students as part of the selection process and all that." So walk us through the application process, the
sure,
interview process.
sure. So an applicant submits their application. It's sent to the admissions committee. I want to also caveat, I have not formally been part of the admissions committee. I serve as a sort of observer role in
Mm-hmm.
admissions process because there's some conflicts of interest, one might say, with the graduate program director serving in admissions, but I serve as part of the conversations to help guide some decisions
Mm-hmm.
and to understand sort of the portfolio of our current students and what we're looking for in incoming students. So an applicant submits their application. It's reviewed by the admissions committee, one or two members initially. And if there's interest, so one thing I'll say, every applicant is reviewed by at least two members of the committee. That's something we're also proud of. It's not one person that's making this decision. It's two sets of eyes that's reviewing it and trying to be fair about assessment. And that's where a lot of these conversations have happened around, comparing academic institutions, comparing transcripts, comparing research experiences, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
is from these rich discussions that have happened. So these two people are really impressed, and they want to invite the applicant to move forward next step. And so in the past, so pre-COVID and during COVID, the next step is a phone interview. So this is typically a very simple phone call, about 15 minutes, where that applicant speaks to a member or two of the admissions committee.
Yeah.
And some of the questions that might be asked is, why are you interested in our program? Tell us a little bit about your background. Are there any updates to your application, or what are your interests in terms of your career and the necessity to enroll in a PhD to be able to realize your dreams in terms of your career? And then they're really impressed with this 15-minute interview. And then pre-COVID, we would invite those folks to come to campus, to come to our department, and we'd have an all-day sort of interview process.
Mm-hmm.
And that would include meeting faculty that they're interested in working with, meeting students, meeting staff, meeting members of the pharmaceutical research computing. So I didn't mention that, but that's something that's so great in our department, is we offer students an allotted number of hours of programming support while they're working on their PhD to be able to make sure that they have they can move forward and not hit major roadblocks in terms of programming, especially when they're working with complicated data sets and doing some complex programming. They come in for that interview session. That's going to be what, I would call the short list. So this is essentially the short list of candidates. And then from that process and the feedback that's generated through that, the final selection is made. Now, because of COVID and sort of the sequelae of COVID, that shortlist process happened online, where applicants, entered a Zoom room, and then they would go into breakout rooms to meet certain faculty, and also meet students and meet staff. So I have mixed opinions, frankly, about both processes. I think there's a value for students coming in person, both from our perspective in meeting the student, but also in the student meeting us in person, and falling in love with us or falling out of love with us. These are really important dynamics, and being in person allows that to happen in a more, I think, substantial way. That being said, while we supported students to come, I think there are some barriers, financial barriers to applicants coming in person, especially international applicants, that I don't want to minimize, like getting a visa to come, taking an international flight, arriving the day before an international flight, having to do a day-long meeting with folks. I think there's some of these dynamics that have played into sort of our discussions of whether or not we want to move back to in-person. So we're still kind of weighing that decision right now. So I think there's pros and cons to both approaches.
Awesome.
And then and that short list process happens, and final selections are made, and we reach out to those applicants.
So after that whole day interview, do you kind of get feedback from students or from maybe other staff that might say, oh, we didn't like the student, we didn't like the way maybe he or she behaved, or he or she spoke to us, or something like that? What kind of, like, what things are you looking for during that day? I mean, when you take out the um assessing the fitness for the program per se, but what other nuances are you looking for in the applicants?
Yeah. So again, this is sort of a hard question to answer, but I would say I have an issue with the idea of fit, okay, because I think it's racialized, I think it's gendered, and I think there's ways where subjectivity can really play a detrimental role in determining whether someone is a quote unquote fit for a department. So as graduate program director, I've always just encouraged people to think of it this way. Would you want this student to be on a research team with you? Would you want this student to be in a class with you? Do you feel like they would be comfortable in our department, the dynamics in our department, etc.? But really cautioning people not to make some subjective assessments around fit. And I want to say, going from the short list to the admitted applicants is an excruciating process.
Yeah.
No, it really truly is. If you are ever around me when that process is happening, it really, really is distressing to me because it's so difficult. And I will tell you sometimes, and I want to convey this to applicants, sometimes it's really us. It's not the applicant. The applicant did a brilliant job, but maybe I'll give you an example. Maybe we had too many students the year before who are focused on pharmacoeconomics. And so we're focused on students who want to do pharmacoepi, or we want to focus on admitting students who want to do PCOR or pharmaceutical policy. And even though the student is really standout, maybe we are going to prioritize another applicant because
of interest.
And so that's where, even when I do the graduate program, when I've done the graduate program director orientation during this shortlist application process, admissions process, I always tell students that, like, you're at the stage where you've been so impressive that you're coming for an interview. At this point, it's almost like take a deep breath. Whatever's meant to happen is meant to happen. There's very little aside from, an egregious violation of professionalism that that can happen. We've had egregious violations of
Wow.
but yes, I won't go into those. But other than that, you really have to trust that what is meant to happen is going to happen. And sometimes it's really the program that's not in a position to admit you because they don't feel like they have the faculty bandwidth to support you in your career goals and your research goals. And so we're a small faculty. And so if the bandwidth of the pharmaco-econ faculty or the PEPI faculty is maxed out, that's going to play a role in the decision process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment. So yeah, we've exhausted like almost an hour, right? We started like 2:30, and
It's been
it's
so
and it's 3:40, and we haven't reached anywhere. Oh wow. I think that it's been an insightful conversation. We have a lot of questions coming in. Maybe we'll take a couple of questions, and then if there's time, we would probably tackle personal statement and recommendation letters, which I think a lot of people are also interested in listening. So we have, okay, let me start from YouTube. Okay. Okay. So this is from Promise. Promise says, thank you for this meeting. I feel so good learning about how you process applicants' grades based on their study environments. Oh, wait. Based on their study. Yeah. I want to, if you also use this approach when checking the study gaps.
I'm not quite sure. I read study gaps as meaning gaps in training. Does that mean that taking a break in training, or does that mean something else that I'm not?
Yeah. Ali, I think if you can rephrase your question, that would be helpful. There's another one from Ahmed Adamu who says, I have two questions. What is the fate of PhD applicants that apply while working towards the completion of their MSc program?
Oh, sorry. Can you put the question back up? Is it what is the fate of applicants that apply
while in a master's program?
While in our master's program or while in another master's program? Let me answer
yes.
both ways. I'll answer both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mix. For applicants from our MS program, it's been a mix. First of all, I want to say our MS program is very small. We've had maximum, I want to say 4 or 5 graduates in the past 5 years. We don't emphasize our MS program too much for several reasons, which are beyond the scope of this conversation. But we really focus on the PhD training, and the fate has been mixed. We have had MS applicants apply to the PhD. Some have been admitted, some have not been admitted.
Okay.
And in those cases where the student has not been admitted, it's not necessarily that the student did not do well in the program. Sometimes it's that the student wants to take their career in a direction that we may have not been able to support.
Okay.
In terms of outside, many of our applicants are currently enrolled in MS programs. So again, it's mixed. So a lot of applicants to our program are have either completed an MS degree or are currently enrolled in MS degree or an MPH degree, and they apply while they're in their master's program. And it as I mentioned, it does help bolster their application because it reflects an engagement in the field and understanding of the field, especially if they do well in their courses, and also, as we talked about, can convey their understanding of the field and the specificities of the field.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that has been brilliantly answered. Ahmed. So yeah. So I think the summary is that not completing your MSc at the time that you're applying wouldn't hurt your chances. But I think the expectation is that by the time you are matriculating into the program, you should have finished your MSc program. You should have finished your master's program.
That's great.
Yeah. So okay. I think so. We'll talk about recommendation letters when we have the time. Okay, let's go to LinkedIn. Okay, there's one student called Gulam Mohammed, PhD student. She says, I'm her direct student. She was our IP teacher at University of Maryland. So he's giving you a shout out.
How sweet.
Okay, someone says, is there a PhD program available in pharmaceuticals, especially healthcare, at University of Maryland? I think there is. If you've been listening to us, there are opportunities, but you have to do your research, right? You have to go into the program website, look at what they are offering, and then you would apply. It's not. I know there are a couple of situations where people advertise PhD positions, but by and large, it's not that common. You would have to really apply for the program and go through all the processes. Somebody says, I am Sunday Kukora. Okay, that's your name. A lab technologist in biochemistry lab in Abuja, and I hold a higher national diploma, that's HND, in science. I'm writing to inquire about the application process for MSc/PhD in the field of. It's a bit confusing. How do they treat HND holders in this field of application?
I'm not so familiar with HND.
Yeah. So
I don't feel like it's fair for me to comment. I'm happy if folks want to send me an email or have specific questions, I can direct them to the appropriate contacts.
Okay. So Sunday, maybe you may have to send an email for so that you get the correct response. Question from Muhammad Musa. It says, thank you. Can IELTS be submitted in place of TOEFL? And also regarding biostatistics, can an online certificate from a recognized institution be used to demonstrate expertise in statistics? I think this is a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the TOEFL or the IELTS, and I do believe this year they're also allowing. There's a new Duolingo exam.
Yeah.
That can be used for language proficiency, and that's actually supposed to support folks where taking the standardized exam is a barrier. Taking the in-person exams is a barrier. So that answer is yes. The other question is, I would say yes to that question around biostat statistics. It would reflect your engagement in the field. I would not feel comfortable saying that it reflects an expertise.
Yeah.
And taking any class singularly does not reflect an expertise in that area. That's actually the motivation for doing a PhD, is to actually reflect an expertise. But I would say that doing a certificate, including it as part of your package, would reflect that you are engaged and you have at least exposure to the field of biostat.
Okay. Yeah. So Mohammed, you've gotten a very comprehensive answer. So I think I want us to tackle the issue of English proficiency tests now. Um, so for English speaking countries, are they allowed to write these language tests? Automatically, are they allowed to write, or are they are supposed to write and request for a waiver?
That's a complicated one. It's very, very institution specific. It really depends on what institution. So if you have a specific question around waiver of the language proficiency test, uh, that gets directed to the graduate school, because the graduate school is the one that requires it. And we're part of the University of Maryland, Baltimore Graduate School. And so you would have to send correspondence to them and say, this is my transcript. I did my training at XYZ institution. Given that all my instruction was in English, I would like to request a waiver, and they will respond. Um, I've seen decisions go both ways depending on the institution.
Okay, yeah. So I think that I did the same thing. I think I wrote an email that I mean everything has been in English since basic school. So eventually they waived the IELTS, the English language proficiency test. And I think most especially, for example, you've had your masters, you've had some form of graduate training in an English speaking institution, then it becomes easier to get a waiver.
That's correct.
We have a question from Chisom Anizoba. Okay, so she says GRE isn't required anymore. That's a question she's asking. And I think the answer is yes, right? We don't require it.
They're not only are they not required, we will not review them.
Okay, so Chisom, don't waste your time writing it, right?
Trust me, I've gotten that question. So that's why I'm very particular about saying that.
Yeah. So
okay, well, it's not required, but does that mean if I submit it, I have better chances? No.
No. Okay. So even if you have 90th percentile and up, don't submit it. Okay. Okay. And there is Aaron. Is there postgraduate opportunity in pharmacology, the University of Maryland?
Yes, there is. That's not the department that I was graduate program director for. It's in the pharmaceutical sciences department. So I would encourage the participant who asked that question,
Yeah.
to go on the University of Maryland, Baltimore Pharmaceutical Sciences Department. They have a PhD program. They have several MS programs as well.
Okay, great. So Aaron, I think you have your answer. We have a lot of thank you. Excited to be here. I'm glad to
excited
be.
to be
I'm okay. So okay. Let's see what we can do, because I think we've taken we've exhausted your time. But there are still some critical areas. So maybe we'll take one or two questions from personal statement and recommendation letter and scholarship. But I think you've answered. You've spoken about the funding scheme and everything already, so that wouldn't need to be repeated. So in terms of personal statements, I think we can put this all together. When you are evaluating someone's personal statement, what sort of importance it's allocated to personal statement, and what elements do you typically look for in a strong personal statement?
Mm-hmm. I would say the personal statement is very important. It's the space for the applicant to sort of do their pitch, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
pitching themselves. You're pitching yourself in the personal statement. You're saying, this is who I am. This is why I want a PhD. This is why I want a PhD in pharmaceutical health services research. This is why I want to do it at your training program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, people miss that part. Okay. And then this is what I plan to do after I get this amazing training at your program. That to
Okay.
me is like a skeleton. I mentioned this earlier that we don't have that much space for the personal statement. It's partly because we receive so many applications and we really do want to do due diligence in reviewing. And if we allowed 3 pages, it just it would not work out. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
So I understand that it's a very limited space. And so I really encourage anytime students, applicants reach out, I always tell them start early, start writing a draft, start talking through your main points with others, have a mentor or two review it. Um, Make sure above anything else, make sure there's no spelling errors, no major grammatical errors. And that's where vetting it early with folks is important. It is harder to write a 500 word personal statement than it is to write a 1,000 word
Yeah,
personal, right?
definitely. Hmm.
And so you have to keep that in mind when you think of the time that you're going to allot to developing the personal statement and when you're going to start writing it, because you want to be very crisp in the writing. No word should be there that does not belong there, because it's a very tight 500 words and it's your pitch to the admissions committee. I'm the right candidate for this program, and I've sort of given you sort of the skeleton points.
Yeah.
I think a natural next question, which you might ask, is sort of what are things to look for? You might have asked it. You know, one thing that I think is a common mistake that applicants make is having personal statements that are very vague. You know, they'll write about their interests, what has generated their interest in public health. Sometimes it's very personal. Um, and I have mixed feelings about having very personal content in a personal statement. I know that sounds counterintuitive, right? But I mean intimate details of a person's life. I would caution against including intimate details. But I've seen very compelling statements where an applicant has said, you know, I had a family member who was struggling with this particular condition, and it really drove me to the field to better understand the type of treatment modalities that are optimal for this debilitating condition.
Hmm.
That's a very compelling story. There's
Yeah.
no need to name anybody. There's no need to really say sometimes what the condition is, but it's just putting the framework in the admissions committee's members' minds of like, what is driving you to be in this field? And I'm just giving you an example. There could be other things
Yeah.
that motivate people. But I think vagueness is really something you want to avoid. You want your statement to be your pitch, not a cookie cutter pitch, not a pitch for, you know, the quote unquote perfect applicant. This is your pitch. You want to say that this is the right program for you. And that includes understanding the program as much as possible. So as you mentioned, Banda, going on the website, clicking through the faculty members' profiles, you can reach out to a few faculty if you'd like to meet them. You know, sometimes folks, those emails get lost in the mix, but you can try. You don't have to. You don't have to reach out to faculty. That's not a precondition for admission to the program. But I think understanding what faculty members in our department do is important. For
Yeah.
example, I remember a few years ago, someone applied and they said they're really interested in pharmacogenomics. And this is an example of an applicant who was stellar, okay? But we have no faculty in our department that do anything related to pharmacogenomics. So that was it was, even though they were a stellar applicant, they were an immediate, you know,
Yeah.
rejection.
Hmm.
We actually communicated to them, we're not the right program for you. You need to apply to programs that have pharmacogenomics as one of their disciplines. But I think being non-specific about the institution that you're applying to is also kind of one of those shortcomings in personal
Yeah.
statement. You know, saying you're really interested in public health, you really want to improve the health of vulnerable populations, but not adding some kind of texture to that, it doesn't make a compelling read.
Yeah.
Let's be blunt. It just does not make a compelling read, and you want it to be a compelling read. And so I think that's part of setting aside time for vetting your statement over and over, putting it aside for a week or two so that your eyes can and your brain can sort of reset, and then coming back to it later. Those are all things that you really need to do for your personal statement. And I think it's also true for your CV, especially around spelling errors, especially around not communicating exactly what you did on a project clearly. Yeah, I think those are
Yeah.
sort of, I'm giving you sort of a skeleton of what I
Mm-hmm,
think
mm-hmm,
should be
mm-hmm.
in the personal statement.
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful to have in your back pocket.
Okay. So if I haven't gotten anything at all from what is expected in a personal statement, one thing that I think stood out is being specific. So specificity is very, very crucial. Don't submit a generic statement or a vague statement, especially at the PhD level.
100%.
Yeah.
Can I add?
Yes.
Can I add something to there, which I didn't mention, but I think part of the specificity, you don't have to do this, but it is helpful, is to say, you've reviewed our faculty research or the work that we're doing in the department, the funding we've received in the department. What are the concentration areas you're interested in?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's where the specificity would be important in our program. What are some of the current faculty research that really piques your interest,
Mm-hmm.
right? That will show and reflect that you know what we're up to, and you've thought about it, and you still believe, and you believe firmly that we're the right program for you. And so
Okay.
I think that's where some of the specificity can happen too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. So recommendation letters.
Puffy.
So how important are recommendation letters? Is it more relevant if it's academic versus a professional reference? Are there specific catchwords or phrases you're looking for when you're reading a recommendation letter?
Well, I'll answer the last question. The answer I'm going to say is no. There's no catchphrase. Please don't use catchphrases.
Mm-hmm.
Catchphrases are not. They shouldn't be used unless it's actually meant.
Mm-hmm.
I think you asked several questions. One of them is academic versus professional. I think it is important to try to get at least one of those letters of recommendation from an academic.
Okay.
Like a faculty member you've worked with, or a faculty member that you took a class with and did really well in. I do think that that's important. I mean, there's two ways of answering this, right? From the perspective of an applicant reaching out to a letter writer, and then what we look for in a letter. We look for strong letters of recommendation. And what that means is a letter that strengthens that pitch for the applicant. This is a letter that says, you saw their CV, you saw their pitch, but I'm going to tell you something else that's amazing about this applicant. They have great analytic skills. They analyzed this data set that I was working on as part of the Ministry of Health when we were researching the impact of COVID in the nursing homes in Thailand. I completely made that up, okay? But that's kind of granularity in a letter is important. And letter writers that are doing their due diligence should do that. They should write specificities in their letter. I think giving your letter recommenders enough time to write a strong letter, making sure with them very explicitly, I cannot overemphasize this, that they are going to write you a strong letter. I will tell you, we've had applicants, and it's really sad when it happens, where a letter is not a strong letter. And that's also a source of stress for me, frankly, because I don't believe you should write a letter for a student or an applicant unless it's going to be a strong one. People have different opinions about it, but the applicant themselves has a right to ask before the letter writer writes it, are you going to write me a strong letter?
Yeah.
And if there's any doubt, do not ask that person to write you a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, I think that is fair. I mean, and sometimes too, it's difficult. Like uh, I think when I was applying my first cycle, I approached one professor, like well known in the Hopkins environment. Like he's very known. So I approached him, discussed with him our intentions of applying for a PhD, and asked for his recommendation letter. Right. And he was like, I've known you for a while. Like, I've known you for a while. I haven't really worked with you, so it's going to be extremely difficult for me to write you a very strong recommendation letter. So I would advise that you speak to other faculty members. If you don't get anybody, you can come back to me and I can put something together for you. Hopefully, I was able to get other people to write me recommendation letters. So I mean, sometimes it's for our own good. If the person says I may not be able to write you a good recommendation, I think it's fair to uh, move ahead and get a different person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we delve into a bit of GPA. We've spoken about the fact that it's difficult to compare GPAs across continents and all that. But in general, if you're assessing admissions, are there any minimum GPAs that you would say no, this one is not good enough?
Well, it's not codified in a document or a regulation anywhere. But I would say if your GPA is below a 3.0, because that's our minimum GPA within the graduate school. You have to
Okay.
maintain a GPA to be in good standing as a student in our school. I would say, unless there's a very compelling reason why, that's difficult. I don't want to sugarcoat it. That would be
Yeah.
difficult.
Okay.
That would be
So yeah, so that 3.0 is that it. So we are talking about graduate level, right? So for example, if someone has a BSc and the BSc their GPA is say 2.7 from Nigeria, right? And they have a master's in the US and they have like say 3.2, 3.4.
Mhm.
How does that affect
I would say I don't want to be copping out on answering, Banda, but I will say that it really depends the other components of the package.
okay.
Like it shows improvement, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
just from a very objective level, it shows that the GPA improved. That's good, right? You want the more proximal GPA to be the higher GPA. That's definitely good.
Yeah.
But to make an assessment, it's really a holistic review of the application. I really, I mean that sincerely. It's really hard to just look at GPAs.
Okay.
Maybe, you could say that there's a person that has that and has been involved in this wonderful research project where they're in charge of the data analysis or they're in charge of the literature review or they're really deeply engaged in research versus someone who has no engagement in the field. They're going to be assessed differently.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I think we've exhausted all our questions.
Great.
Yes, we'll just if you have time, maybe a couple more questions from the audience, maybe 2 or 3 questions. So we go back to LinkedIn. So we have a question from Tope. So Tope says that will there be a master's admission this year?
No.
Okay. Um, Another question from the same person: could there be other reasons why students don't get responses to their cold emails apart from poorly crafted emails?
That's a tough one. Okay, now we're gonna if we're gonna have a conversation about the cold emails, let me say a few things about the cold emails.
Okay.
If they have value when they're deliberate and they're sent to specific faculty that applicants genuinely have an interest in working with or meeting. But I've seen this happen many times where someone will mass cold email everyone in a department. And I'm telling you, we know that it happens.
You talk to each other.
Guess what? We talk to each other. Guess what? We forward emails and say, oh, this applicant might be better for you. Somebody might say, oh, I reviewed their CV, Danya. They might be better for you. And I say, oh, well, they already sent me an email. They sent you an email too? Oh, yeah, they sent me an email too. I really want to caution folks about doing that, because that is read as, unfortunately, it's read as disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's well intentioned. I understand the instinct to do it, but be very deliberate, especially when you're sending multiple emails within a department.
Yeah.
People forward emails. So I think it's really important. If you genuinely want to meet someone, you're genuinely interested, reach out to them. I think the questioner asked, is there a reason other than it being poorly crafted that someone won't respond? That's one reason, that they do not believe it's a genuine request because they've learned that it was a mass email. The second one, I know this is, sometimes people don't respond because it gets lost in their email inbox.
Yeah.
To be honest, like I've had it happen where I read an email on a Friday evening and I'm like, oh, I'm going to respond to it. And then Monday comes, I have no idea who sent me that email because it's a new person. And you know, the search function on Outlook is horrific. So you'll be looking for that email. And so I would say if you are moving with great intention and deliberation and someone doesn't respond, give them a couple of weeks, reach out to them again. The third reason is they may not have interest in taking time away from their schedule to meet an applicant, especially if they're not taking students.
Yeah.
I would say they should still respond and say, I'm really not taking students, but I'm just telling you the fact of the matter. That could be what's happening too. I definitely would not take it personally. You want to build a resilience around emails not going answered. I've developed a resilience for that. But I would just say move with great deliberation when you're doing cold emails. And I would also go back to what I said earlier. Remember, we don't match students when they start the program. So as I said, if a student reaches out to me, I think they're amazing. I would love to work with them. I would never say, I can guarantee that you're going to be part of my research team come second year. No, because we have a whole process of students getting to know faculty. And I want to respect that process, both for my sake and for the students' sake.
Okay. So is it safe to say that not cold emailing a professor in this particular program is not a red flag? It's not like a negative.
You're saying if you don't email?
Yeah, if you don't email anybody, you just apply to the program. Is it?
Absolutely. That's not considered at all. I mean, let me take that. It's not considered at all. If you actually have an engagement and it's really positive, it would be considered. And I would encourage an applicant who has had engagement with faculty, let's say at a professional society meeting or at a networking event or some other encounter, to mention it in their application.
Okay.
But it is not, you don't get points off because you didn't engage with faculty beforehand. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's good to know. Question from Anuche Victor. He says, "I'm really glad I made it here. Please, is she talking about PhD epidemiology or in pharmaceutical sciences? I think it's both, right?"
No, our PhD is in pharmaceutical health services research. And so we are a graduate training program that's focused on health services research, which includes deploying and leveraging epidemiologic methods, biostatistics methods, econometric methods, depending on your concentration, patient-centered outcomes research methods to answer questions of relevance to population health.
Yeah.
So a PhD program in pharmaceutical sciences is going to be a different PhD program. A PhD program that is only in epidemiology, without this multidisciplinary focus, that would be in a University of Maryland School of Medicine, has a PhD in epidemiology.
Yeah.
I teach in that program, but the graduate program is in pharmaceutical health services research.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason why I'm saying that is that University of Maryland has pharmacoepi under the pharmaceutical services and research. Hopkins has pharmacoepi under the Department of Epidemiology, right?
Yes.
So so PhD epi, and you can decide to do pharmacoepi, right? Yeah. So we have Philip Jeremy. It's okay. Excited. All right. Yeah. So I think we've gone through most of the questions on LinkedIn. YouTube, what is the weight of recommendation letters? Does the qualification of the referee matters? Example, having your undergraduate lecturer who does not have a PhD writing recommendations for a PhD application.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's no sort of metric for this. It's more, is it an academic that can speak to your performance in a class or performance as a research assistant or someone who worked with them intimately and can speak highly of your work style, your professionalism, your kindness and generosity, because those are also important attributes of an applicant. So I think that's more important than the standing of the referee, because I think that's also bringing in subjectivity into the process of assessing referees, is to say, well, this one person has more renowned than this person, so we're going to weight this more. There's really no deliberate process by which that happens. Or I would say there's no intentional process by which that happens. It might be unintentional.
Okay. One other question that I think is interesting is, I want to know if I am a PhD student in my country, I'm doing my PhD in my home country, is it possible to apply for a PhD position in your country? Yeah.
Maybe. Of course you can apply. I think you would want to be clear about why you were leaving your current PhD program. I do receive that question every so often. You would want to be clear why you're leaving your current program. That's all I'll say about that. It's to go from one PhD program to another is a sensitive transition, and so you would just want to communicate why you're keen on making that transition.
Okay, and Ebenezer says, can someone with a PhD in public health still apply for your PhD program?
Sure. Why not? Everything we talked about still comes into play.
Yeah.
What is your motivation for applying for a PhD in pharmaceutical health services research? What about the field? What about the department is compelling to you?
Yeah. I have a lot of, I have this funny question, but anyway. So somebody says that there's another thing that troubles me. Here, I don't know where here is. Chukuka Ali. I don't know where you're speaking from. It says here it's common for your thesis supervisor to publish their students' work under their name. In my case, before I was able to ask for my undergraduate thesis, my supervisor had already sent it out for peer review. I ended up being a co-author, but I practically did everything during the project. How will this affect my application?
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you. that's difficult probably to experience. So I'm sorry that that happened to you. I would say communicate that. Obviously, communicate it delicately. Um, you don't want to throw your supervisor under the bus in an application, right? Don't do that in the application, okay? But I would say very clearly, this my master's thesis, where I contributed, you essentially wrote it from what it sounds like. You wrote it, you did the analysis, was published in this journal, and then I wouldn't overemphasize that your advisor was the first author. I would just say my thesis,
Yeah.
that I authored, with, you can say, with the support of my advisor, was published in XYZ journal. But I wouldn't go into details about that process. It might be something, if you're invited to an interview, that you could bring up. In my country, there's a practice of having faculty submit their students' MS in their name, but this was my work.
Awesome. Last question.
Okay.
What if you have research publication on another concentration of public health, despite your interest, and application being another?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I follow it.
yeah.
So I would say we're getting into the what ifs, right, Banda? What if this? What if that? Everything still stands. If you've done really great research in public health that is not necessarily very specific to, health services research or
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical health services research, but it's still public health, it's still health related, it still reflects your engagement with research, even if it's, for example, clinical research, but that you make a case why you want to take that research and pivot it to research that's more squarely in the space of pharmaceutical health services research. But
Okay.
that's not a lost part of your application. That means that you've engaged in research. That means that you've been part of this world of asking a research question and using data, using a multitude of sources to answer it, right? Because that's the heart of research.
Mm-hmm.
And it reflects your understanding of that. And so you don't want to diminish from that positive aspect of your application. You just want to make the case as to why you're pivoting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been 1 hour 48 minutes.
Wow. It's been fun.
Yeah, this is the longest we've gone. It's been really engaging, and I think that our listeners have learned so much today. What is left is for them to go on and explore the program website, and then see what aligns with their interests. So, Dr. Qato, thank you so much for honoring my invitation. I've been looking up to this interview for like several weeks. I remember sending you an email thinking that was last week. But I'm glad that we've been able to make this happen. Thank you so much for your time. Before you go, what is the typical job outlook for your students after graduation? Which sectors or industries do they usually go? And then you can add your last words.
Sure. Well, I've been really honored to be here with you, Banda. I am so grateful for all the attendees for participating. I hope it's been instructive and illuminating, and I'm happy to serve as a resource for applicants. So our students are competitive across the board. We have students who are in industry, so they work in health economics outcomes research units within the pharmaceutical industry. We have students who work in government, in particular Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Food and Drug Administration. We have students who go into academia. I mentioned a student who who started a consulting firm on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Within
Yeah.
2 years of graduation, it's already super successful. So we're really proud of these, the diversity of job opportunities and careers that our students go into. And I think it reflects the multidisciplinary nature of our training, that
Yeah.
students are able to really be competitive in all of these potential avenues for careers. So that's sort of the makeup of our graduates: consulting, industry, government, and academia.
Awesome. Awesome. Your last words for.
Sure. I guess my last words are that I want to circle back with what I said earlier. There's no cookie cutter recipe for a perfect application. What is the most important for an applicant to do is take their time.
Time. Mm-hmm.
Take your time. Read your application essay, investigate the department, actually learn if it's the right department for you. It might genuinely not be the right training program for you. So then you should really not waste your time applying. So really think about also your own interests into this, that has driven you to the point where you're applying to graduate training. So center yourself in this process, more so than you should be centering, these cookie cutter application recommendations.
Yeah.
The thing is, you do your due diligence to put your best foot forward, and that takes time. It takes diligence, and it takes support. And so find those people around you that can support you, even if that means someone that just reads over your application. Make sure there's no egregious spelling errors, or your CV, to make sure that you're highlighting your accomplishments adequately. That's another thing I see, Banda, is
Yeah.
people have a CV, and I'm like, why didn't you mention this amazing experience you told me about in your interview in your CV?
Your CV. Yeah.
The applicant will say, I didn't think it was important. It's like, oh my goodness, it's important because it shows XYZ about your training and your exposure
Yeah.
prior to the program. So just really thinking thoughtfully about how you bring your application forward. And it is a holistic process. So bringing your whole self into it, I think, is the way to go.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for your
welcome.
time once again. We are so glad that you've been able to join us. Hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation sometime in the future. And I think I would have to pass through University of Maryland to come and see you one of these days.
I would love to see you, and thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. So I think this has been one of the most insightful interviews I've had with a program director. I mean, she's elaborated a lot of things. She's talked about so many things, from the program, what the program offers, to application requirements, to importance of cold email, to scholarship opportunities, to what students typically do after they graduate. And I will entreat all of you, whether you have a background in pharmacy or medicine or economics or whatever, try and go to the program website. I'll leave a link to the program website on my LinkedIn. You can check it, go to the website, explore the program in detail, and then you may end up finding a very good fit for your interest. The good thing about it, I think somebody's asking about scholarship. This program is fully funded, with one of the highest stipend in the US. Your tuition is guaranteed, insurance, stipend, everything is guaranteed, and above all, it's very, very quality. So take your time, explore, and then you can apply. So thank you all for joining me today. I think it's been really exciting. I've enjoyed the session so much. For those of you who are not able to join me or who want to watch this later, this program would be available forever on my YouTube page or my YouTube channel. So kindly check Dr. Banda Khalifa on YouTube. And while you're there, just make sure to subscribe and like and then share my content with other prospective students. So thank you for joining me. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. I think that our next event is with the program chair of the Johns Hopkins Department of Biostatistics that is scheduled for, I think, next week. So see you again sometime soon. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Hello everyone, my name is I'm a medical doctor from Ghana. I completed my MPH degree at the Harvard Th School of Public Health this past summer. Last year, during my application process, I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Banda Khalifa, who is a friend and a senior colleague. Dr. Banda's knowledge and experience of the graduate application process made it easier to write an outstanding personal statement, also aim for the right test scores and finding the right people to write recommendation letters for me. He also gave me a really good insight about the funding landscape available for me for my education. I was able to get admission into most of the top schools that I applied for, including Johns Hopkins, Columbia University, Boston University, and then Harvard University. Yeah, so if you are actually looking to advance your studies and you're looking for a good and friendly coach, I'll recommend no other person than Dr. Banda.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Banda Khalifa, a PhD student at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and an MPH MBA Summer Scholar alum. I've navigated the graduate school application process, gaining admission into institutions like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins. And now I'm here to help you on your journey. Remember, the journey to graduate school may seem tough, but with the right tools and mindset, you'll be on your way to success. Don't forget to check out my other videos for more tips and insights. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing forward. Dr. Banda signing off.
Hello everyone, I am Emmanuel Hanimashan. I'm a Nigerian physician. I met Dr. Banda sometime last year. I remember I had a very difficult time trying to prepare my application packages to schools of public health in the United States, and I went online in search of information, and then I came across his LinkedIn profile. I remember I connected with him, and then I spent a long day going through his profile, and I found really very interesting things where he had shared insights into a lot of the application, a lot of components of the application process. I also eventually got to follow his YouTube account. I saw a lot of videos, and I saw that he had a lot of stuff that were quite inspiring. For one, I liked the fact that he had gone through the process. He had really nice admission offers when he was going to move to the United States, and that gave me some sort of assurance that he had gone through it, and I could as well go through the same process that he had gone through using the advice that he had given. It was really helpful. He also organized a couple of live sessions, I remember, where he brought in faculty, people who were in charge of admissions in some of these schools, and that was really very helpful for me. And I followed this process, basically I followed through with everything that he recommended, and I got really good results. At the end of the application cycle, I got admitted into Johns Hopkins University, Harvard, Yale, Emory, and I mean, those were like, I really didn't apply to much schools because I sort of believed in the processes that he had outlined, and I got admitted into the schools that I applied to. And I got really good scholarship offers too. I eventually chose to come to Hopkins. where I'm currently enrolled in the MPH.MD dual degree program. And I must say it was also very helpful in selecting which school I would eventually come to, because I had a really tough time trying to decide. When you have really good offers, you have a hard time deciding, and it was very helpful. I recommend that everyone who is applying to schools of public health or to graduate school generally in the United States should definitely follow Dr. Banda on his LinkedIn, his YouTube, follow him everywhere, and you can be rest assured that he's always ready to answer your questions and attend to your concerns. You don't even have to necessarily always speak with him. Just by following his pages and following up with the activities, you definitely are on a good path. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ama Isuman, and I'm a physician from Ghana. 2 years ago, I decided to apply for the dual degree MPH and MBA at Hopkins. So I went onto the Hopkins website and looked for current and past students who had gone through the program. And I was happy to see a Ghanaian face there. I saw Dr. Banda on the Hopkins website. So I looked him up on LinkedIn, reached out to Dr. Banda on LinkedIn, because I had specific questions about the dual degree MBA MPH program here and about the summer scholarship as well, because I was interested in, he was doing the program under the summer scholarship. He answered my questions, helped me assess my fit for the program, and down the line also talked me through how to communicate with school officials with some of the different questions I had and who to talk to as well. So, fast forward, today I'm here at Hopkins, a dual degree student pursuing my MBA and MPH. I'm a summer scholar and I go into all the schools I applied to. So if you're thinking of applying for graduate school here, whether it's an MPH or a PhD program, I recommend watching his videos on YouTube and LinkedIn because they have very helpful information in there. Thank you.